Hello, everybody. Today we are going to talk about one of the most important writers of modernism, that is James Joyce. He was born in 1882 and he died in 1941. Joyce is a very famous writer because he started with modernist ideas and he brought all these ideas to their extreme. When he was very young, he attended Jesuit schools and then the University College in Dublin. He graduated in 1902. Then he went to Paris and briefly came back to Dublin when his mother died. But later he left Ireland forever. All his career feels the influence of his desire to escape from Ireland because he sees Ireland as the center of what he calls paralysis. And this paralysis is characterized by narrowness, bigotry, and Puritanism. In 1904, he met Nora Barnacle, and she was a companion for all his life, but he married her only in 1931. They lived in Europe, in particular in Trieste, where he met Italo Svevo. Both of them in Trieste were trying to publish their works, Senilità Svevo and Dubliners Joyce. During the First Two World War, he moved to Zurich, and in Zurich he died in 1941. As for his main works, we mention Dubliners, published in 1914, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, 1916, Ulysses, 1922, and Finnegan's Wake, 1939. But we will focus our attention on the first and on the third work, that is on Dubliners and on Ulysses. Dubliners is a collection of short stories which is divided into 4 sections. Stories of childhood, first section. Stories of adolescence, second section. Stories of mature life, third section. And finally, stories of public life, fourth section. The last story of this collection, The Dead, is the longest, and it goes beyond these 4 categories, and so it is considered as a sort of coda to the whole collection. The title, Dubliners, is significant in itself because this work contains these single short stories whose title gives a sense of anonymity and insignificance, as we will see from these examples: Evelyn, the mother, Grace, etc. As Joyce himself wrote to a friend, I am writing a series of epicleti. With this term, Joyce intends that he refers to the Catholic tradition. So he refers to epiclesis. What is epiclesis? It is the passage in which we have the transubstantiation from bread and wine into body and blood of Jesus Christ during the Mass. So with this term, we can grasp the idea that the novelist wants to transform all ordinary events, gestures, and details into something different with a great symbolic value. So what we want to say is this: with the use of Catholic terms, Joyce belongs to the Catholic tradition, but he doesn't want to respect this tradition. He wants to change the Catholic tradition and transforms it into a symbolic one. The two key concepts of Dubliners are epiphany and paralysis. With epiphany, we intend a sudden revelation caused by a trivial gesture or a banal object in everyday life of characters. With it, characters have an understanding of themselves and of their life and try to escape their life. So, epiphany is the moment when we realize how sad and how insignificant is our existence and we desire to escape. Unfortunately, with paralysis, we are not able to do anything because paralysis is characteristic of modern frenetic and impersonal life. Characters want to change their lives but are unable to do it. So they passively continue their sad existence. Paralysis is thus both physical and moral, and it is also the failure of the desire to escape. In this idea, Dublin is the center of paralysis. So, to sum up this slide, which is very important, every character in Joyce has an epiphany. That is, there is a sudden moment when he realizes that he wants to escape from his sad existence, but he is unable to change his life, and so he is paralyzed, and his sad existence goes on and on and on forever. As for the narrative technique, Dubliners is traditional but follows all the rules of the modernist novel because the style is realistic, concise and impersonal. Every detail has a symbolic meaning, and each story is told by the perspective of the single character. The register can be both colloquial and formal, depending on the section and on the story. And finally, monologues are in the form of free, direct speech and thought, which is very similar to that used by Virginia Woolf, as we considered in the previous lessons. An example of Dubliners of these short stories is Evelyn, who sits at the windows looking into the street and remembering her childhood when she used to play with other children in the field, which has now developed with new homes. Her thoughts turn to be negative when she thinks of her father and of her sad life. Evelyn must face a difficult dilemma: remain at home or go away with Frank, her boyfriend, who is also a sailor. He wants to marry Frank. She wants to marry Frank, and they both want to go to Buenos Aires to start a new life together. So she finally decides to abandon home and family and go with Frank. But the sound of a street organ reminds her of her mother's death and a promise made to her to dedicate herself to maintaining the home. So she goes to the dock in Dublin, but she sees the crowd. She sees Frank waiting for her. But the last words of the short story explain the moment of her paralysis. She set her white face to him, passive, like a helpless animal. Her eyes gave him no sign or love or farewell or recognition. As we can see from these two aspects, the sound of a street organ reminds us the first keyword, epiphany, while the standing without any motion at the docks reminds us the paralysis. With the passing of time, the modernist ideas in Joyce reached their climax, and in his masterpiece Ulysses, the narrative technique becomes becomes more and more modernist. In this work, we can find memories of the past, impressions of the present, expectations of the futures, all of them mixed together. There is always the theme of epiphany, so something unexpected which should change our life, but at the same time, nothing happens. The work is based on the Odyssey by Homer, but while in the epic poem Homer presented the adventures of Ulysses amidst giants, angry gods, and monsters, while he goes home to Ithaca, Greece. In Joyce's Ulysses, the protagonist is Leopold Bloom, who wanders around Dublin, and what he does is getting breakfast, feeding his cat, going to a funeral, doing his job, visiting pubs and restaurants, and thinking about his unfaithful wife, Molly Bloom, and she is the opposed character to the faithful Penelope. In this novel, the stream of consciousness, which was predicted by William James, reaches its climax, especially in the 4 pages of the novel, with Molly falling asleep and where everything is only a flux of thoughts. Joyce omits punctuation because he wants to reproduce the thoughts of the woman, Molly's thoughts, without any grammatical or syntactical control. And as you can see, here is an example of her stream. She describes flowers. I love flowers. I'd love to have in the whole place swimming in roses. God of heaven, there's nothing like nature, the wild mountains, then the sea and the waves rushing down the beautiful country with fields of oats and wheat and all kinds of things, and all the fine cattle going about. That would do our heart good to see rivers and lakes and flowers, all sorts of shapes and smells and colours springing up even out of the ditches, primroses and violets. Nature, it is as for them saying there's no God. I wouldn't give a snap for my 2 fingers of all their learning. Why don't they go and create something? I often asked him, atheists or whatever they call themselves, go and wash the cobbles of themselves first. As we can see, these thoughts have no consciousness, have no control, have no order. Past, present, and future are mixed together. Reflections are mixed and have no sense, because the final lesson of James Joyce is this: the novelist wants to show his reading public, to show us how different can be literature, and how the aim of literature is not writing stories, telling stories. On the contrary, the main aim of literature is to show thoughts as they appear on our mind. This is the first and most important lesson of the modernist writers, and in this sense, Joyce reaches modernism and takes it to its extremes. This is the end of our lesson.